What this child said about his biological mother will make your hair stand on end.
Hello everyone, enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch.
Thomas Dalton was only 8 years old, but his eyes were always fixed on the ground as if he were hiding a tremendous secret. The house where he lived with his mother was known in the neighborhood as the Silent House because from inside, no music or laughter ever came out. On Monday morning, Thomas walked through the gates of Lincoln Elementary School. His uniform was old and worn, the sleeves frayed, and both knees covered in band-aids. He silently crossed the playground, where other children were playing soccer, but no one called out his name. They were used to the fact that Thomas wasn't like anyone else. Thomas! A voice called out. It was his teacher, Alicia, gentle but tinged with concern. Ms. Alicia Morgan was the only person who usually paid attention to Thomas. She crouched down to his eye level, her gaze carefully observant. "Did you fall again? Your arm is scraped. So are your knees." Thomas froze, stammering, "I tripped on the stairs. Last time you said you slipped in the bathtub. The week before, it was at the park." Her tone was kind but firm. "Thomas, you can tell me the truth." He shook his head, forcing a crooked smile. "No one would believe me." Ms. Alicia frowned. "Why would you say that?" Thomas whispered, his voice strangled, "Because Mom hits me. Then she says sorry, but it's not her. The voice, it's different, like a man's." Alicia went silent. She had never heard such a strange claim from a child. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thomas, are you sure? I mean, does your mom live with someone else?" Thomas shook his head vigorously. "No. It's just me and Mom. But sometimes when she looks at me, her eyes feel like a stranger's. She calls me, 'You filthy brat,' and then the next day she cries, says she's sorry, but she won't look me in the eye. My mom has two people." That afternoon in the teacher's lounge, Alicia recounted the conversation with Thomas. Principal Mr. Henry sat frowning, twirling his pen on the desk. "Ms. Morgan," he said slowly, "this isn't the first time he's told stories like this, is it?" "No," Alicia nodded. "But this time, he was more detailed. About the voice, her eyes. I'm worried he's living in a dangerous situation. Or he could be imagining it. He's a withdrawn kid. Might have psychological issues." Alicia protested, "But the injuries on his body are real. Scrapes, bruises, his knees even show signs of hard impact." Another teacher, Mr. James Logan, chimed in, "Irene Dalton is a single mom. Her husband left when the boy was a baby. She works as a waitress at the Dark Wolf Bar, comes home late every night. Stress is understandable." "Stress is no excuse for hitting your child," Alicia said coldly. "Maybe the boy's harming himself to get attention." Mr. Logan shrugged. "Lonely kids, no friends, they often do that." Mr. Henry tapped his pen lightly on the desk. "We can't jump to conclusions. The school will document the matter and file a report with Child Welfare Services. In the meantime, we observe." But observing meant doing nothing at all. That afternoon, after school, Thomas walked home. Along the way, he slipped through rows of cracked houses, past noisy bars echoing with men's laughter. He stopped at a small corner store on Maple Street, where the elderly shopkeeper, Mrs. Mary Turner, often gave him an apple whenever he helped her stack bottles. "You look so sad today, Thomas," Mrs. Mary said as she sliced bread. "Did your classmates pick on you again?" The boy stayed silent. After a moment, he mumbled, "Mrs. Mary, do you believe in ghosts?" "Ghosts?" She chuckled. "You mean spirits?" "No, like someone alive. But someone else living inside them." The old woman froze for a few seconds, then softened her voice. "Who told you that?" Thomas shrugged. "I think someone is living inside my mom." Mrs. Mary placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes darkening. "Have you told anyone?" "I told Ms. Alicia. But, everyone thinks I'm just imagining things." The old woman sighed. "There are things grown-ups don't want to believe, child." When he got home, the boy opened the door and stepped into a room lit by a single dangling yellow bulb. The air was musty, the rice pot cold. On the table, a plate of eggs sat under a mesh food cover. "Mom?" he called softly. No answer. He tiptoed up the stairs. His mother's door was ajar. He gently pushed it open. Irene Dalton sat on the bed, facing the wall. Her hair was messy, her clothes disheveled, her right fingers tapping the wall in a steady rhythm. "Mom?" Thomas called, his voice trembling. She turned her head, eyes blank. A voice came out hoarse and unfamiliar. "You're back, you little brat." Thomas stepped back. "Mom. I'm hungry." "Then feed yourself. I'm not raising some useless thing." Her voice didn't sound like hers. Thomas trembled as he backed down to the kitchen. A few minutes later, he heard heavy footsteps behind him. His mother knew something else was coming down. "Thomas," she roared. He startled and dropped the bowl of rice. "Spilled it again. You're only good at wrecking things." Her hand struck like lightning. A loud slap echoed through the empty kitchen. The boy fell hard, 5 red fingers imprinted on his cheek. I'm sorry. Mom." Irene stood still. Then she suddenly laughed, the voice distorted like someone else was laughing through her. "Sorry. You haven't learned how to shut up yet." The boy crawled into the kitchen corner, hands over his head. Her shadow backed out of the room, her footsteps heavy as if dragging another soul behind her. That night, Thomas lay curled under the blanket, eyes wide open, not daring to blink. He no longer knew who was living in the house with him. His mom? Or a cruel, unfamiliar stranger who had taken over her body? The answer, he wasn't ready to know. Lately, Thomas hadn't slept through a single night. He often woke up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was staring at him. It didn't feel like a loved one watching over a sleeping child but like a wild animal lurking in the dark. On the 3rd night in a row, he woke up at 2 a.m. The room was pitch black, save for a flicker of streetlight shimmering through the thin curtains. Thomas opened his eyes, lying still. His heart pounded at the foot of the bed, someone was standing motionless like a statue. "Mom," he whispered. No response. The figure didn't move or speak. Thomas slowly sat up, trying to lean forward. "Mom, are you okay?" The figure suddenly let out a heavy breath, then turned away. Long, bony fingers began tapping the wall. The rhythm was steady, cold. Tap, 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 tap. The boy shivered and crawled back under the blanket, curling up like a hedgehog. He didn't dare cry, didn't dare call out again. That tapping was the thing he feared most because every time it started, his mom would disappear. And the other would take her place. The next day, Thomas came to school with dark circles under his eyes. Ms. Alicia noticed immediately. "You didn't sleep, did you? What happened at home last night?" Thomas glanced around and whispered, "Mom," was standing in the dark again. Then she tapped on the wall. But she didn't say anything. "Are you sure it was your mom?" she asked, her voice gentle as if treading on thin ice. "I don't know. That breathing didn't sound like hers." Thomas whispered. "I asked, but she didn't look at me. That wasn't my mom." That afternoon, Alicia called Child Protective Services. The man who answered was Samuel Smith, a social worker in Northern California. "Samuel, this is a teacher calling about a student named Thomas Dalton. He lives with his mother, Irene. I'm afraid he's being abused and showing signs of extreme fear. Has there been any prior report?" "Nothing official. But now it's worse. He says his mother is like two different people. And he shows both physical and psychological trauma. Samuel took notes, then replied, I'll make a home visit. We need to be sure, Alicia. Claims like this sometimes come from the imagination. I know, Ms. Alicia said. But what if this time it's real? That night, the worst nightmare came. Thomas was sleeping when he heard knocks on his door. Knock, knock, knock. Thomas, a whisper called. Get up, you little pest. The boy opened his eyes. The door creaked open, and light from the hallway shone on his mother's face, or at least the face of someone wearing it. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, hair hanging down both cheeks. I didn't do anything wrong, Mom. Come here. The voice was distorted, hoarse like gravel rolling in her throat. Thomas stepped out. She grabbed his hand and pulled him down the stairs. Each of her steps landed like metal slamming against the wooden floor. When they reached the kitchen, she suddenly threw him to the ground. Before he could speak, she shouted. You dared to tell outsiders, huh? I didn't. I was just talking to my teacher. Slap. A blow landed hard on the left cheek. Teacher. The dogs can smell it. Thomas burst into tears. Mom, please don't. I'm scared. You have to learn to be silent, her voice roared, then slipped into muttering, like me, back then. I didn't stay silent. Suddenly, she kicked Thomas hard. The boy was thrown backward, his head hitting the leg of the table. His vision blurred. His breath began to fade. In that fading moment, he heard a sound, a whisper, and then, nothing. When Thomas woke up, pale morning light streamed in from the window. A quiet morning. No yelling, no shadows. Next to his pillow, there was a piece of paper. He picked it up with trembling hands. The handwriting was erratic, as if written in a state of madness. I didn't mean to hurt the boy, but he needs to learn to be silent. The boy held the note, sitting motionless on the bed. That morning, Alicia Morgan received a phone call from Mrs. Anna, the local grocery shop owner. Alicia, you should go to Thomas's house. Yesterday, I saw the boy walking unsteadily, and there was dried blood behind his ear. I didn't dare interfere, but I'm scared. Without hesitation, Alicia called Samuel Smith. You need to go to Thomas's house immediately. I'm certain that boy is in danger. An hour later, Samuel knocked on the door of house number 14 on Martin Street. Irene Dalton answered. Her eyes were sunken with dark circles, her cheek bruised as if self-inflicted. She wore an oversized sweater, was barefoot, and her voice was tired. You are. I'm Samuel Smith, a social worker. I received a report suggesting possible child abuse here. Irene frowned. Who said that? The teacher and a neighbor. I need to speak with Thomas. The boy's sleeping. He has a slight fever. Then please allow me to see him for a moment. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Do as you please. My house is always under suspicion. Samuel entered, his eyes scanning the cold, empty house. Thomas was lying on the sofa, his face pale, eyes shut tightly. Samuel gently leaned over and nudged him. Thomas, can you hear me? The boy opened his eyes slightly and nodded. What happened to you last night? Thomas glanced toward his mother, who stood behind. For a fleeting second, her eyes shifted like a different person had just awakened in that body. He trembled and whispered, I fell down the stairs. Are you sure? Samuel asked again, trying to keep a calm tone. The boy bit his lip and said nothing more. Samuel sat upright and turned to Irene. We'll need to follow up. I'll be filing a report. Irene smirked. Do what you want. Everyone's good at judging. 3 days later, Samuel's report was sent to the city's Child Protection Office. But due to the lack of concrete evidence, the case was dismissed. A note was attached. No clear signs confirming abuse. Mother cooperative, no criminal record. Child statements inconsistent. Further monitoring recommended. When Alicia received the news, she slammed the desk. Further monitoring. Until the kid's dead. No one responded. On a gloomy Thursday morning, Samuel Smith returned to Lincoln Elementary School. In his hand was the closed investigation file marked with a bright red stamp, lack of evidence. He knocked on the teacher's office door, where Alicia Morgan was grading papers. The moment she saw him, she stood up immediately. "Don't tell me the case has been shelved," she nearly blurted out. Samuel nodded, his voice heavy. "I did everything I could. They want more data." More data. The boy practically spelled it out. What more do they need? The words of an 8-year-old, with no witnesses, and no doctor confirming the injuries were inflicted. That's how the law works. Alicia clenched her fists. "Then I'll find more. Don't give up, Samuel. At least, don't give up on Thomas." That afternoon, Alicia brought Thomas to the school counseling office. She had also invited a child psychologist, Mrs. Rose Newton, from the California Child Psychology Department to assist. Thomas sat curled up on the chair, his legs swinging without touching the ground. Rose gently began the session. "Thomas, my name is Rose. I just want to have a little chat with you. If there's anything you don't like, you can let me know." He gave a slight nod. "Can you tell me about your mom?" Thomas went quiet. After a while, he spoke. "My mom is two people." Rose smiled softly, taking notes. "What do you mean?" "One mom is nice, she hugs me a lot, she cries a lot. The other mom never looks at me. That mom is cold like stone." "Do you know when your mom changes?" Thomas blinked. "When she's quiet for a long, long time, then she starts tapping her fingers on the wall. When she comes back, her voice is hoarse-like, like a man." "A man's voice?" Rose asked, surprised. "Yes, she apologizes to me in that voice. But she doesn't cry, she doesn't look at me, she's not mom." Alicia sat beside him, silent. Rose continued, gently probing. "Do you remember any recent time when her voice changed?" Thomas nodded. "The night before last. Mom called me a little bastard and said I deserved it, but afterward, she said, 'I'm sorry,' in a voice like that old grumpy man in the movies." "Thomas, can I ask something? Have you ever heard anyone else talk in the house besides your mom?" "No, just mom and that person." "Who is that person?" "I don't know. But I think that person lives inside mom." Rose stopped writing. She looked at Alicia with eyes filled with concern and doubt. A child couldn't imagine this with such precision, unless he was truly living it. "Thomas," Rose asked, "are you afraid of your mom?" The boy didn't answer immediately. He looked down, clutched the hem of his shirt tightly, then slowly nodded. "I'm scared of mom, not because she hits me. I'm scared that she's no longer my mom." The session ended in heavy silence. Rose stood and walked out into the hallway with Alicia and Samuel. "What do you think?" Alicia asked. Rose exhaled. "If it's not psychosis, then it could be a form of dissociative identity disorder. I'm not ruling out multiple personality disorder. The boy described it too accurately. This isn't a child's imagination." Samuel frowned. "But no doctor has confirmed any psychological condition for Irene." "Not yet," Rose replied. "But I think we need to look into old medical records. Someone must know. Family? Former neighbors? Colleagues?" Samuel nodded. "I'll try to trace something." That afternoon, Samuel dropped by the home of an old neighbor, Mr. Benjamin Green, who lived 3 houses down from Irene. Mr. Benjamin, in his 60s, often sat on a wooden chair in front of his house, smoking a pipe and observing everything on the street like a living timeline. "Good afternoon, Mr. Benjamin. I'm a social worker, investigating the case at Irene Dalton's house." Mr. Benjamin nodded, exhaling smoke. "That girl's always been odd. Kept to herself her whole life. But I do feel sorry for her." "Why is that, sir?" "Her stepfather, Mr. Marcus, used to beat her throughout her childhood. I remember clearly every night, we'd hear screams from that house." Samuel took notes. "Do you know where Mr. Marcus is now?" "No one does. After a huge argument when Irene was about 20, the guy vanished. Last I heard, he moved down south." "Did Irene ever go through therapy?" "She did. When she was younger, a doctor used to come pick her up regularly. His name was, what was it? Dr. Harris, I think." Samuel immediately wrote down the name, Dr. Lucas Harris. The next day, Samuel went to the old psychiatric hospital in the San Pablo area of California. After a few phone calls and some record searches, he was led to the office of the now-retired doctor, who still consulted at the hospital. Dr. Lucas Harris welcomed him with a calm demeanor. "You're asking about Irene Dalton?" "Yes. She's the subject of our investigation. There are signs of a psychological disorder affecting her son." Dr. Harris nodded slowly. "I used to treat her." The final diagnosis was dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. A defensive personality developed after years of both physical and emotional abuse by her stepfather. "Is there any note about the second personality, doctor?" "Yes. We used to refer to that personality as the other. Deep voice, aggressive. When that personality took over, Irene had no recollection. She had made progress after 3 years of treatment, but after becoming pregnant with Thomas, she suddenly stopped everything." "Why?" "Her family requested it. They wanted to hide the past. She disappeared from the system." Samuel frowned. "So no one's monitored her condition since?" "No one at all." He thanked the doctor and stood up. But just before he left, Dr. Harris gently grabbed his hand. "That woman once told me, if one day I hurt someone again, please lock me up. Don't take this lightly. If the other returns, there will be tragedy." That evening, Samuel got home, turned on his desk lamp, and stared at the file. The line, "I didn't mean to hurt the boy, but he needs to learn to be silent," was bolded on the paper, and next to it, a new note. "The other may have resurfaced. Thomas is the direct victim." He gripped his pen tightly. This was no longer a case of ordinary domestic abuse. This was the invasion of darkness within a mother's mind, and that child was crying out in silence. California was soaked in the lingering spring rain. Samuel Smith walked into the district attorney's office at City Hall, carrying a thick stack of case files. He decided to take a gamble. If Child Protective Services ignored the case due to lack of criminal evidence, then he would find another way by requesting a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation for Irene Dalton. Seated across from him was Prosecutor Amy Thompson, a woman in her 50s, streaks of gray in her hair and eyes as sharp as a scalpel. "You believe this is a serious personality disorder?" she asked, eyes locked on the file, specifically the term, "the other." "Yes." Dr. Harris confirmed he used to treat Irene Dalton. "Recent signs indicate that violent personality has returned." "Can you be certain?" "No. But I know the boy, Thomas, is living in a house with a live grenade." The prosecutor closed the file. "You want me to sign a court order for forced evaluation?" Samuel nodded. "At the very least, have Irene undergo a psychiatric assessment at St. Joseph Medical Center. If the results are conclusive, we'll have the grounds to protect the child." "Fine," she said curtly. "I'll issue the order. But I'll need testimony from someone who knows her past. A relative, perhaps." Samuel paused and then remembered. Lucy Dalton, Irene's cousin, currently living in New Haven, just an hour from California. He called immediately to arrange a meeting. Lucy Dalton was a woman in her 30s, tall, thin, with eyes full of the sorrow of a northern winter. She worked as a librarian at New Haven University, lived alone, and rarely spoke of her family. "I thought Irene was dead," Lucy said after a long silence. "The whole family cut ties with her." "Why?" Samuel asked. "Because she remembered too much." He frowned. "Remembered what?" Lucy looked down at her teacup and lowered her voice. "Mr. Marcus. Her stepfather. He was the family's nightmare." "Did you witness anything?" "Not directly. But I lived in that house as a child. And I heard things." "Heard what?" "Irene sobbing, begging. Marcus calling her a damned witch. Then, slaps, crashes. No peaceful night." "Your parents didn't do anything?" Lucy let out a dry laugh. "My parents? They said it was a family matter. That Irene exaggerated to get attention. Then, when she turned 18, she ran away. No one stopped her. Everyone thought, if she disappeared, there'd finally be peace." "What about Marcus?" "He stayed at first. Then one day, I overheard my mom on the phone saying Marcus had fled. No one knew where he went." Samuel took notes. "Did you ever see Irene again?" Lucy shook her head. "Once. When she was pregnant with Thomas. She came to me and said, for the first time, 'I'm scared of loving something.' I asked her why, but she didn't answer. She just held her belly and cried." "Have you ever heard of something called the other?" Lucy flinched. She mentioned it. "When we were kids, every time she got hurt, she'd say, 'Don't let the other come. Don't let him in.'" "So, the other was a personality formed from trauma?" Lucy nodded faintly. "She was always afraid that one day, the shadow inside her would open the door and walk out." Samuel fell silent. The story was too clear, too painful. He didn't wait any longer. Upon returning from New Haven, he immediately submitted Lucy's testimony to the local court file. 3 days later, the court issued a forced psychiatric evaluation order. Irene Dalton was transferred to St. Joseph Medical Center. The assigned doctor was Dr. Richard Martin, a forensic psychologist. Thomas did not go with her. He was temporarily placed at the Hope Haven shelter, cared for by Sister Grace and the social worker Mrs. Pauline. During Irene's first session at the hospital, Dr. Richard began the conversation. "Irene, do you know why you've been brought here?" She remained silent, eyes cast down. "We're not here to judge. Only to understand." She sighed. "Do you think I'm insane?" "I don't think anything. I'm just listening. But I have to ask, have you ever felt like someone else lives inside you?" There was a long pause. Then Irene spoke, very softly, "I don't hear him, but I know, he's there." "Him?" "The other. Do you remember what you do when the other appears?" She shook her head, eyes reddening. "Only that. I opened my eyes, and Thomas was on the floor. I saw blood. I felt terrified. Has anyone ever hurt you in the past?" Irene gave a bitter laugh. "Mr. Marcus. My stepfather. He liked experimenting with emotions on children." "Experimenting?" "He made me stand still for hours in a dark closet, just to see how long it took for me to cry. Then he'd laugh, 'If you're still crying, you're still alive.' One day, I stopped crying. And from that day on, he came. He, as in Marcus. He, is Marcus inside me." Meanwhile, at the Hope Haven shelter, Thomas was playing alone with a wooden block set. Sister Grace sat nearby, watching. Suddenly, the boy asked, "Sister Grace, is my mom locked up?" She hesitated. Your mom is just receiving care. So she can feel better. But what if she doesn't want to feel better? Why do you ask that? Thomas blinked. Because, the bad person inside her isn't afraid of being locked up. He's only afraid of being seen. Mrs. Pauline came over and held his hand. Thomas, do you remember the last time your mom hugged you? The boy paused. Yes. One time, she woke up after that person left. She hugged me really tight. She said, "I'm sorry. I promise I'll disappear if it helps you survive." And how did that make you feel? I was scared she'd really disappear. At the hospital, Dr. Richard documented every word from their sessions. After 3 evaluations, he issued his conclusion. Patient Irene Dalton has a history of dissociative identity disorder with a secondary violent personality. Condition has relapsed after a period without treatment. Recommend continued separation from her son indefinitely for safety. Samuel held the final report in his hands. He knew one chapter of darkness had closed. But another was about to begin, a chapter of buried crimes and decades of silence. A week after Irene Dalton was admitted to St. Joseph Medical Center, Samuel Smith received a package from a retired archivist. The sender, who had worked at the Buffalo Family Support Center, chose to remain anonymous. Inside the package was an old cassette tape, simply labeled with the letter M. Along with it, a handwritten note read, "If you really want to know who the other is, listen to this tape. I've kept it for 20 years because no one believed me. Maybe now it's finally time for it to come to light." Samuel immediately rushed home, rummaged through storage for an old cassette player, slid the tape in, and pressed play. Static crackled, then a man's voice broke through, raspy, heavy, as if speaking through a throat full of gravel. "The girl has to learn to shut up. If she keeps blabbing, I'll tie her up and lock her in that goddamn cabinet." Samuel shot up. That voice, it was unmistakable. Exactly as Thomas had described. And more importantly, it matched Irene's voice whenever the other personality emerged. He hit stop and dialed Alicia Morgan without delay. "Alicia, I need you to hear this. I'm at school. What's going on? This isn't routine. Do you have a cassette player? There's one in the old storage room, but I'm coming now." At Lincoln Elementary School, Samuel laid the tape on the desk. Alicia and Rose Newton listened together. When Marcus's voice came through again, Alicia turned pale. "It's him," she said. "It's really him. The other." Rose held her head in her hands. And if Irene was exposed to that voice as a child, the second personality may not have emerged spontaneously. It may have been an unconscious imitation. "What do you mean?" Alicia asked. "It happens when a child survives by mimicking their abuser's voice. Over time, that persona takes over the body. Irene wasn't just traumatized, she was programmed to become Marcus." Samuel nodded, his eyes burning with resolve. "I'm going to find him. Marcus isn't dead. I'm sure of it." "Based on what?" Rose asked. "There's no record of his death. Everything about him is rumor. And if the tape still exists, the person who sent it might know where Marcus is." Samuel launched an investigation. He combed through old citizen records at the California Civil Registry, expanding his search to Buffalo, Rochester, and Amherst. One afternoon, he uncovered a faint but promising lead. Marcus Bennett had gone missing in 1999. No death certificate, no record of leaving the United States. In a 2005 administrative registry, a man with a similar name, Marshall Barrett, had registered as executive director of a private nursing home in Albany, Oak Haven Senior Center. Samuel went straight there, carrying a printed photo of young Marcus provided by Lucy Dalton. He was greeted by a young receptionist named Bethany. "Hello. I'm Samuel Smith, a social worker. I'd like to ask about Mr. Marshall Barrett." She frowned. "Our director. Is there a problem?" Just a background check. May I see a photo of him? Sure. Give me a moment. 5 minutes later, she returned with a portrait from the hallway. Samuel stared. His heart clenched like a fist. It was him. Older, but those eyes, those venomous, reptilian eyes were unmistakable. He asked, "Does he have family?" "No. No one ever visits. He lives alone, very private." "Would you let me see his personnel file?" "Sorry, not without a court order." Samuel nodded. "Understood. But please, be cautious. He may not be who you think he is." The next day, Samuel obtained a court warrant for Marshall Barrett's identification. He returned with two local officers, Sergeant Jack Evans and Officer Ryan Carter, to Oak Haven Senior Center. Marcus was sitting in his office, signing papers. When Samuel entered, he looked up, voice rough. "Who are you?" "Marcus Bennett." "Don't know him." "I'm Marshall." Samuel placed the old photo on the desk. "Then who's this?" Marcus glanced at it. His lips pressed together. No answer. Sergeant Evans stepped forward. "You're being summoned for reinvestigation of child abuse allegations from 1987 to 1995. Police have a warrant for your arrest." Marcus burst out laughing, dry, bitter laughter. "Over 30 years ago. Now you people care. Looking for someone who hit a kid? Who hasn't hit a kid, huh?" Samuel's fists clenched. "We're looking for the man who created a monster that lives inside his own daughter." Marcus stopped laughing. His eyes turned to steel. "That stupid girl," went blabbing to outsiders again. Ryan slapped cuffs on him, pinning his hands to the desk. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used in court." Marcus smirked but didn't resist. The news of Marcus Bennett's arrest spread like wildfire. Media outlets seized the story. Local TV stations aired footage of the arrest with the headline, "Demon in his twilight, nursing home director accused of torturing daughter for years." At the hospital, when Irene saw the report, tears fell down her face. "He's still alive. He's still alive." Dr. Richard asked gently, "How do you feel?" Irene shook her head. "Not angry. Not hurt. Just regret. That I let him live inside me for so long." At Hope Haven Shelter, Thomas watched TV with Sister Grace. When he saw Marcus being escorted away, he turned his head. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "What is it, sweetheart?" Thomas whispered, "That voice. I know that voice. It's the one that used to whisper in my mother's sleep." Sister Grace held his hand tightly. "He's been brought into the light now. He can't hurt you anymore." Thomas stared out the window. Rain began to fall. But inside him, something had started to crack open. On Monday morning, Hope Haven Shelter received a special notice from the California Juvenile Guardianship Court. As part of ongoing psychological supervision and to assess mother-child interaction, a brief meeting between Irene Dalton and Thomas would be arranged at her home, under direct supervision of a social worker. Samuel Smith was assigned to the task. Upon hearing the decision, he hesitated. "I'm not sure this is the right time." Rose Newton, the psychological consultant accompanying him, nodded. "I understand your concern. But if we don't give them this opportunity, it'll be hard to assess whether Irene's primary personality is still in control." "We'll intervene immediately if there's any sign of danger," Samuel said firmly. Thomas didn't oppose the visit. He only asked one question when informed. "Is my mom better now?" Rose replied gently, "She's trying very hard." "Then, will I be seeing my mom, or the other one?" The question hung in the air, quietly. That afternoon, they brought Thomas back to the old house on Martin Street. Samuel entered first, inspecting each room. Irene stood in the kitchen, wearing a beige cardigan, her hair tied up, her face strangely serene. "Hello, Mr. Smith," she said softly, like a breath. "Hello, Mrs. Dalton. Thomas will come in shortly. Rose and I will be here to supervise." "Of course," she nodded. Rose pulled Samuel aside. "She's in her primary personality right now. Her face is soft, her voice is steady, her posture is intense." "You're sure?" he whispered. "Up to this moment, I believe so." The door opened. Thomas stepped inside. He looked around. Everything was painfully familiar. That kitchen, that sofa, the crack in the wall, and the woman standing before him, wearing the face he no longer dared to trust. "Mom," he called out softly. Irene froze. Her eyes welled slightly, but she held back. "Hello, Thomas." Thomas walked forward, but not too close. "Do you remember who I am today?" Irene knelt down, looking straight into her son's eyes. "I remember. I remember every night you slept, every word you said when you were just learning to talk. I'm sorry, Thomas. I'm sorry for the things I couldn't control." The boy stood still. "So, where is the other one?" The room went completely silent. Irene swallowed hard. "I don't know. But I try to tie him down inside my mind. Every single day." Rose observed closely, jotting notes. Samuel stood near the door, one hand resting on his belt, where his emergency radio was clipped. "Do you still have the drawing you made?" Irene asked. Thomas nodded. "It's at the shelter." "The one with me, and the other one?" "Yeah. One face of you is smiling. The other has no eyes." Irene lowered her head, tearing up. "I saw that drawing in a dream. I know, you've been living in fear." Thomas pressed his lips together. "Are you afraid of him?" She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, "No. I'm afraid of myself." Suddenly, she started to tremble. Her hands curled inward, her eyes widened. Rose stood up quickly. "Samuel, she's showing signs." Irene clutched her head, her voice shifting into something distorted. "Get out. Get the boy out of here." Thomas backed away, eyes wide with fear. "Mom." The voice that came out of Irene's throat was low, cold, and deathly commanding. "You need to learn fear, the way I did." Samuel grabbed his radio. "Request immediate medical backup. We have an emergency situation." Rose held Thomas. He struggled, shouting, "Let me go. My mom, she's being swallowed." Irene stood upright. Her eyes were hollow, like a wax statue. "Thomas," she hissed through clenched teeth, "do you know what silence means?" The boy screamed, "Don't be like this, Mom. You said you remembered me." Her hands shook violently. Then suddenly, she clutched her head, collapsed to her knees, and screamed. "Get out. You're not me." Rose rushed to her side. Samuel shouted, "Back up. She's in a dissociative episode." Thomas froze. He trembled but didn't run. He simply placed his hand over his chest, where his heart pounded like a drum. Irene screamed one last time. "I'll be back, you can't stop me." Then she collapsed onto the floor. Her body convulsed a few times, then went still. Four medical staff rushed in. One checked her pulse, another administered a sedative. "We're transferring her to the hospital immediately." Samuel nodded. Rose held Thomas and whispered. "You were very brave." Thomas didn't speak. He just quietly watched his mother being carried out of the house. He had lived there with a strange spirit, and now, he had seen it awaken through the very eyes of the woman who gave birth to him. A few days later, Irene was transferred to the Special Psychological Isolation Unit of St. Joseph Medical Center. She was no longer permitted to see Thomas. Rose filed an urgent report to the center, stating, "Patient exhibits a distinct secondary personality with separate voice, behavior, and language. The alternate identity poses a threatening risk to minors. Permanent separation from her son is advised." Samuel signed the confirmation. His hand trembled slightly. On the table, Thomas's colored drawing lay printed, a woman with two faces, one warm, the other void. "We did the right thing," Rose said. "Right, but painful," Samuel replied. "That boy, he's lost his mother, even though she's still alive." At Hope Haven Shelter, Thomas sat by the window, watching the rain fall. Mrs. Pauline brought him a cup of warm milk. "Thomas, if you want to write a letter to your mom, I'll help you." The boy shook his head. "Are you angry at her?" "No." "Why not?" Thomas answered in a voice far older than his years. "Because my mom was also someone trapped." Mrs. Pauline took his hand. "For someone so young to think that way, that's remarkable." He looked her straight in the eyes. "But if I'm not strong, who's going to protect my mom from him?" Mrs. Pauline had no answer. 3 weeks passed since Irene Dalton had been placed in the special isolation ward. St. Joseph Medical Center assigned a dedicated psychiatric care team to monitor her, Dr. Richard Martin, head nurse Ellen Roberts, and 2 rotating supervisors, Joanna Miller and Claire Hill. Nothing changed. No outbursts. No episodes. But also, no recovery. Irene lived like a shadow, often sitting for hours by the window, her eyes gazing into the distance. Every time someone asked her anything, she would reply with the same sentence. "I don't remember anything." On April 12, Dr. Richard recorded in her chart. "Patient in deep dissociative state. No signs of alternate personality, but also not engaging as her primary self. Emotions flat, disconnected. Psychological state no longer clearly tied to reality." He set down his pen and sighed. Claire Hill, sorting medication nearby, asked quietly, "Doctor, do you think she still has a chance to rejoin society?" Richard shook his head. "Not until she faces herself. Right now, she's stuck in between, not really anyone." Claire glanced out the window. "But she has a child." "That's exactly why she's shattered," Richard whispered. "Some people carry children hoping to escape the darkness, never realizing they might bring the darkness with them." Back at Hope Haven Shelter, Rose Newton returned for a scheduled check-in with Thomas. The boy looked thinner, his face longer, his eyes no longer held the innocence of an 8-year-old. "Are you sleeping okay?" Rose asked. "I have dreams." "What do you dream about?" "My mom, standing outside a door. Not to look at me. To guard against him. She's afraid he'll get out." "You think he's still inside your mom?" Thomas nodded, then looked up. "But she's not fighting him anymore." "Why do you think that?" "Because she doesn't cry anymore." Rose took notes, then asked softly, "Do you want to see your mom?" Thomas was silent for a moment. Then he said, "If she's really still there. I want to say goodbye." On April 20th, after multiple meetings with Dr. Richard, Rose, Samuel Smith, and the guardianship court representative, a rare decision was approved. Thomas would be allowed one final visit with Irene in a secure room, under full supervision. The meeting was held in the afternoon, in a small white room devoid of anything dangerous. Just a table, 2 chairs, and a one-way mirror where Samuel, Rose, and Richard could observe. Irene was brought in first. She sat quietly, eyes drifting down to her hands now veined and scarred, fingernails bitten down to the quick. The door opened. Thomas walked in. He stood before his mother for a few seconds in silence, then pulled out a chair and sat. His face was no longer that of a typical 8-year-old, it belonged to a child who had seen too much cruelty. Irene slowly looked up. Her eyes met her son's. There were no screams. No episodes. Just, a mother. "Hello, sweetheart," she said gently. "Hi, Mom." Irene pressed her lips together. "I wasn't sure you'd still want to look at me. I wasn't sure you were still, my mom." She closed her eyes, nodding slowly. "You're right. I didn't come to ask if you did it. I know you don't remember." "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas clasped his hands together, eyes glistening. "I just came to ask, why?" Irene froze. That question was an abyss. "I once thought, giving birth to you would give me a reason to live. But I didn't realize, the dark part of me would be jealous of that." "That person, was it him?" "It was him," Irene replied, her lips trembling. "But it was also me. Because I let him stay." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "I was so afraid of you that I used to wish I'd never been born." Irene burst into tears for the first time since being admitted to the hospital. "Do you know, some mornings I'd wake up and see your face bruised and bloodied, and I wouldn't remember why. I just knew. I wanted to die right then." "Then why didn't you confess?" "Because I was a coward. And because I was scared that if I told the truth, I'd lose you forever." Thomas looked up. "You already lost me." Irene nodded. "I know." The two of them sat in silence. Outside the observation room, Rose clutched her chest, tears falling. Samuel whispered, "This is the first time he's been allowed to choose forgiveness, even if only in his heart." Inside, Irene pulled something small from her pocket, an old piece of paper the doctor had approved for her to bring in. "I wrote this when you were 3. But I never had the courage to give it to you." She slid the note across the table. Thomas opened it. The handwriting was shaky. "If one day I hurt you, don't believe it means I didn't love you. It means I let the devil wear the mask of love." Thomas finished reading and laid the paper back on the table. He said nothing. Then, he stood up and walked over to his mother. Irene looked up, her hands shaking. "Thomas." He said nothing. He just gently leaned down and hugged her. It wasn't long, nor tight, but it was enough to say, "You're still human. And I see that." Irene sobbed silently. Through tears, she whispered, "I'm not your mother anymore. I just hope someone stops me." Thomas whispered back, "I did." After the visit, Thomas returned to the shelter. He remained silent the entire evening, speaking to no one. It wasn't until Mrs. Pauline came to read his bedtime story that he finally spoke. "Miss Pauline." "Yes, sweetheart." "If I forgive my mom, is that wrong?" She looked at him, then sat beside the bed. "No one's wrong for choosing forgiveness. Wrong is thinking you have to forget in order to forgive. I haven't forgotten. I remember everything." "Then you're stronger than anything your mother ever feared." The next morning, Rose submitted her final report to the court. The child is no longer in a state of panic. Though still affected, his emotional resilience shows a remarkable path of self-recovery. The final embrace did not erase the trauma, but it became the foundation for a new choice, to live without carrying hatred. The story of Irene Dalton ends here like a photograph with burnt edges. A mother who was no longer herself. A child forced to grow up in the darkness of two people, one who gave birth to him, and one who lurked, waiting to destroy him. But he walked out. Not with victory, but with a hug. A hug for the humanity left in a soul that had almost shattered. News of Marcus Bennett, the director of Albany's Oak Haven Senior Center, being arrested for allegedly abusing his own daughter throughout her childhood spread rapidly across media outlets in the United States. National television network NBC, local channels like The Washington Post, and even the New York Times ran bold headlines. "Ghosts of the Past, Nursing Home Director Identified as Longtime Child Abuser." The story quickly became a focal point of public outrage. Not just for its cruelty, but for the fact that the man had evaded justice for nearly 30 years, living under a false identity, in plain sight. At the office of Prosecutor Amy Thompson, Samuel Smith was presenting the extended investigation file. Also present were children's rights attorney Matthew Sanders, a representative from the California Police Department, and preliminary investigating judge, Mrs. Laura Parks. "We need to reopen Irene Dalton's file under her rightful status as both witness and victim," Samuel said. The original file was closed without a single psychological evaluation, no trauma examination, no formal statement taken. It was a double crime, one committed by the abuser, and one committed by the system that ignored her. Judge Parks nodded. "I've reviewed the entire case. With the cassette recording and Dr. Harris's psychiatric assessment, we have sufficient grounds to indict Marcus." Attorney Matthew added, "In addition, I'm in contact with 3 other potential witnesses who lived near the Dalton home back then. One has already submitted an anonymous report." "Do you have a name?" Joanna asked. "Yes. Her name is Sophie Campbell. She lived across the street from Irene. She said, 'I used to hear that poor girl locked in the shed, screaming for her mother. Every time it happened, she wouldn't come out of the house for days afterward.'" Samuel folded his hands. "So we have more than just testimony. We have eyewitnesses, audio evidence, and documented pathology. We're not just protecting Thomas, we're restoring justice for Irene." At the same time, at St. Joseph Medical Center, Rose Newton returned to visit Irene after more than 10 days away. She brought copies of the news articles not to cause pain, but to return the right to truth to a woman once forced into silence. Irene took the papers, her eyes skimming the headline. "From respected director to family demon, the fall of Marcus Bennett." "He's really going to be tried?" she asked, her voice barely believing. Rose nodded. "He's facing up to 30 years. This time, the system is on your side." Irene gave a bitter smile. "The system once left me to rot. But the little girl who was once silenced, is now a woman who can stand up and speak." Irene was quiet for a long time. Then she said slowly, "I don't want him to die. I want him to live long enough, to see that I'm no longer afraid." In the following month, an independent team of investigators led by Matthew Sanders began reconstructing Marcus's entire pattern of abuse. Not just focused on Irene, they widened the search to every institution he had worked at over the past 25 years. At Oak Haven Senior Center, 3 nurses came forward. One of them, Daniel Grant, had worked closely with Marcus for 6 years. "I always saw him as controlling, domineering, especially toward elderly female patients. Many were isolated, cut off from phone and mail. No one dared speak up, he was too powerful." Another nurse, Carla Mitchell, testified, "I once heard him yell at an Alzheimer's patient, 'You're as stupid as my own daughter.' When I questioned him, he just laughed and said, 'Discipline is the highest form of pity.'" Matthew compiled all the testimonies and submitted them to the case file. By mid-June, the preliminary hearing began at the Albany District Court. Samuel and Rose escorted Irene to the courthouse through the back entrance to avoid the press. They brought her to the witness preparation room. "You can stop at any time," Rose said. "No one is forcing you to relive what's too much." Irene looked through the glass. Across the hall, Marcus sat beside his lawyer. He looked older than in the newspapers, but his raised chin and arrogant gaze were unchanged. Rose squeezed her hand. "If you can't do it, I'll understand." Irene shook her head. "No. I have to speak. Not for me. For Thomas. So he knows." His mother stood up. In the courtroom, Judge Laura Parks presided. Marcus was brought to the defendant's stand. The man still wore a gray suit, calm and composed, hands folded as if attending a board meeting. When the judge asked, "Do you acknowledge that you are Marcus Bennett, born in 1953 in Amherst?" He smirked. "That person died a long time ago. Then do you deny that you abused Irene Dalton? She made it up, he shrugged. These days, everyone wants to be a victim. Matthew stood. Your Honor, we have audio evidence with a 98% voice match to the defendant's current voice. We have 5 corroborating witnesses. And most importantly, the primary witness, the victim herself, is present today to testify. When Irene entered the courtroom, the room fell completely silent. Marcus looked at her and sneered. You're still alive. I thought you offed yourself in 2000. Irene didn't respond. She stood in the middle of the courtroom, her voice trembling but clear. I am Irene Dalton. I was the child you locked in a closet. The girl you called an animal. The one you taught that silence was the price for being loved. Marcus burst out laughing. The same tired act. Do you need attention that badly? Irene looked him straight in the eye. No. I don't need attention. I need my son to know, his mother is no longer silent. The courtroom responded with a quiet round of applause. The judge motioned for order. Please continue, ma'am. Irene continued, her voice steadier. I'm not here to beg for pity. I'm here to say this, I won. I'm no longer afraid of the darkness you left inside me. And the fact that I'm still alive, is proof that you failed. Marcus growled, you're making all this up. Attorney Matthew stood. We have diagnostic reports from 3 independent physicians confirming that Mrs. Dalton suffers from dissociative identity disorder caused by prolonged childhood abuse. The alter ego known as the other speaks with a voice that matches the defendant's at a 96% similarity according to forensic analysis. The judge nodded. The evidence is sufficient. The official trial will be held within 30 days. As they left the courthouse, Irene turned to Rose and said quietly. I don't find him frightening anymore. Because you've overcome him? Irene shook her head. Because for the first time, I see how small he really is. 30 days after the hearing, the Albany District Court opened the official trial. Marcus Bennett, also known as Marshall Barrett, was charged with abuse, prolonged physical and psychological violence against a minor, violation of personal dignity, identity fraud, and obstruction of personal liberty. The courtroom was packed. Reporters crowded the iron gates outside. Among the public were elderly residents who had once lived under his cold rule at Oak Haven Senior Center. Judge Laura Parks presided, wearing her black robe and striking the gavel. The trial is now in session. Does the defendant have a final statement? Marcus stepped forward, still composed, but the cold confidence in his eyes had dimmed. I don't deny being strict. I taught. I disciplined. And if this society calls that abuse, then society is wrong. Matthew Sanders stood and countered. You're not being judged for being strict. You're being judged for destroying a human being. For planting fear so deep into a child that she had to create a replica of you just to survive. The air froze. Matthew turned to the judge. We are requesting the maximum sentence, 30 years in prison without parole, under Article 173.2 of the United States Penal Code. After 3 hours of deliberation, the judge read the verdict. This court sentences Marcus Bennett to 30 years imprisonment without parole. The defendant will serve his sentence at a high-security facility in Buffalo, with no access to the media or visitation privileges. The sentence echoed amidst quiet sobs. Marcus showed no reaction. But as he passed by Irene, he glanced at her one last time and muttered. You're in prison too. Inside your own mind. Irene looked back, unblinking. But I have a way out. The news of the sentence spread across the U.S. In an exclusive interview on NBC, a reporter asked Samuel Smith. Do you consider Irene Dalton a victim or someone at fault? Samuel responded firmly, she is a victim. But a victim who chose to stand up. And that makes her one of the strongest people I've ever met. At Hope Haven Shelter, Mrs. Pauline walked into Thomas's room one summer afternoon. "Thomas, you've got a letter." The boy opened it. White paper, slightly slanted handwriting. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't scream in your dreams last night. Thank you for not closing your heart." Thomas read to the end. At the bottom was one single line. "If one day you're no longer afraid of me, I hope to hug you, not to ask for forgiveness, but to remind you, you won." He folded the letter. Sat quietly for a long while. Then whispered, "I want to see my mom." After consulting with Dr. Richard and Rose, a second visit was arranged, this time at the treatment center, in the outdoor garden, with sunlight, birdsong, and rows of peppermint trees. Irene sat on a stone bench, her hair cut short, her face bare, simple, and unadorned. The boy entered the garden, still holding the letter tightly. They looked at each other for a few seconds. No one spoke. Then Irene slowly stood up. Thomas stepped closer. Very close. "Do you dream of me?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, voice thick with emotion. "In the dream, you're not crying anymore. And I no longer have to say sorry." "So, do you still see him?" Irene slowly shook her head. "No. Because I let the light in." Thomas raised the letter. "I read it all. I understand. I hope you didn't have to understand. I only hoped you'd get to live like a normal child." "But I'm not normal," the boy replied. "I'm the one who hugged you, when no one else dared to touch you." Irene burst into tears. For the first time, she cried not from pain but from the knowledge that she was still allowed to feel. Thomas stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You already won. And I'm still here." In September, Thomas was officially placed with an adoptive family, John Walker and Tina Price, a married couple and art teachers from Amherst. They had been volunteers at Hope Haven Shelter, and the boy had grown to trust them. Before leaving the center, Thomas was asked, "What do you want to bring with you?" He asked for only one thing, the drawing of his mother with two faces. "Why this one?" Mrs. Pauline asked. "Because it reminds me. I didn't imagine it all. It was real. And I made it out." Years later, Thomas Dalton appeared on the radio show Voices That Were Silenced, which interviewed survivors who overcame their pasts. When the host asked, "Did you forgive your mother?" Thomas smiled. His young adult voice was warm and full of confidence. "I didn't forgive her because she was innocent. I forgave her because she fought to love me with whatever humanity she had left." The audience fell silent. The host said just one line. "You are proof that even from hell, life can grow." In a quiet room at a psychological rehabilitation center for women in Buffalo, Irene Dalton now works in the internal library. Once a month, she receives a hand-drawn letter. No return address. Just 3 words on each one. "I'm still here." This story is a powerful reminder that unhealed trauma can spread across years, even generations. Irene was not only a victim, but also living proof of the human spirit's power when it dares to face the darkness within. Thomas, though just a child, chose to forgive not because he forgot, but because he understood. And the greatest lesson of all. Justice does not come only from the courts, but from the moment someone dares to break the silence, rise up, and say, "I'm not afraid anymore."
If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.